Well, thank you all for coming. This feels like old home week for me, not only being here again, but chatting, having the chance to chat with Marcia. We overlapped for 20 years in the Supreme Court press room.
Boy, are we old.
And we discussed things of interest and substance, much as I hope that we'll do tonight. So you see her book, The Roberts Court, The Struggle for the Constitution. And maybe I'll start by asking to expand a little bit on that subtitle, The Struggle for the Constitution. It's not sort of whose Constitution is it, but who understands the real meaning of the Constitution, right? And you frame this, I should just, for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the book, Marcia made the interesting choice to frame her story of the Roberts Court through the lens of 4 major Roberts Court cases. One about guns, one about race, one about money, and one about health care. So it doesn't get much more fundamental than that. And you can have lots of struggles for the constitutional implications of those subjects. So I just ask you to elaborate a bit on that.
Sure. The struggle is within the court over the meaning and the scope of certain provisions in the Constitution, but it's also a struggle outside of the court, as I tell the backstories of the 4 cases that I picked to draw the reader through about 7 years of the Roberts Court. So this is a story about the Roberts Court in general, and then a story specifically about these 4 cases. And it's also a struggle just within our country. You see it playing out almost every day over the meaning of certain provisions of the Constitution. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about why I chose the 4 cases that I did. As Linda said, they cover 4 areas: race, guns, money in elections, and health care. Initially, I was looking to do something that I think most Supreme Court books don't always do. Most Supreme Court books either focus on the nomination confirmation process or what's happening or happened in the Supreme Court itself. But I really wanted to tell stories of how cases get to the Supreme Court. You know, they don't land at the courthouse door fully blown, fully grown. It takes a lot of commitment by the people involved, a lot of strategizing by the lawyers. It's a hard slog often through the lower courts, although some cases can get there very quickly depending on what happened in the lower courts.
People may not realize that the court takes only about 1%, 1 or 2% of all the cases that reach them.
That's amazing when you consider that they get on average about 8,000 petitions every year from people who want the court to review their cases. But as I was looking for the 4 cases, I wanted 5-4 decisions. Now, I wanted those not to show that the court is always divided 5-4. It's not. In fact, as you'll find out in the book, and as many of us know who cover the court, really more than 50% of the decisions that are issued by the Supreme Court are either unanimous, 8-1, or 7-2.
They had 3 unanimous cases yesterday.
Yes. So there's really a lot of consensus across the court, even though it's often divided, it's ideologically divided. But I wanted 5-4 decisions because that's really, I think, where we learn the most about individual justices and how they view certain provisions in the Constitution, as well as how they approach their jobs. I also wanted, obviously, what I would call signature decisions of the Roberts Court, the court under John Roberts, Jr. And these 4 cases, I think, will always be associated with the Roberts Court. Then, obviously, I wanted good backstories, people you want to know about. You're going to read, you will read about a Seattle mother, Kathleen Brose, who called herself a mama bear before Sarah Palin coined the term. And her effort, which initially was unsuccessful, to get her daughter into an oversubscribed top high school in Seattle. And when she found that the school district was using race as one of a number of tiebreakers, she filed a lawsuit and challenged it, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. I also found along the way that, and I didn't start with this in mind, that these 4 cases also had something else in common. They had very smart conservative or libertarian lawyers behind them. In some cases, you would call them agenda cases. These were issues that the lawyers or the organizations backing them wanted to get to the Supreme Court for a final decision. And they had their eye on an increasingly conservative, hopefully sympathetic Supreme Court. So that's why I chose the 4 cases that I did. So I wanted it to be a book that is a good read, not just a heavily legal book. And that is not what I wanted to write.
So John Roberts has been Chief Justice for 8 years, and his predecessor, William Rehnquist, I think was chief for, what, 17 years, something like that? So we're early in what we anticipate to be a tenure of maybe 25 years. John Roberts was the youngest Chief Justice ever named to the court since the great John Marshall at age 50. So did you ever have the feeling in the back of your mind, is it too soon to judge or to offer a take on the Roberts Court?
I did, actually, and I point out in the book, and I try to make it very clear that I do consider this still a young court, even though the oldest justice is 80, and you really only have, I think now, 3 justices who are still in their 50s. But I did wonder about that. I guess I should tell you how the book really came about first. I was covering Elena Kagan's confirmation hearings in the summer of 2010 when I received really 2 extraordinary emails. The one email was from an editor at Simon & Schuster who was very interested in a book about the Supreme Court. And the other email was from a very faithful PBS fan, a young man who attached a photo, who asked me to marry him.
And Marcia's already taken, by the way.
I was, but I did show it to my husband. By the way, it was such a beautifully written proposal. I showed it to my husband, who proposed to me in a parking lot in downtown Baltimore. But there was no future in that proposal. So I did respond to the one from the editor at Simon & Schuster. And she really convinced me that it was a good time to look at the Supreme Court, because even though it was young, and this was 5 years into John Roberts' tenure as chief, it had shown a willingness to really take on some very controversial issues. And part of the reason I picked the 4 cases I did was because I wanted issues that I thought, based on those 5 years, would have some shelf life, that we'd see them coming back. And we have. This term in particular, there are 2 cases involving race. Next term, there's another big campaign finance case, brought, by the way, by the same lawyer who brought Citizens United to the Supreme Court. I'm sure we're going to see another healthcare challenge, not the kind we saw last term, but as you've probably read, there are a number of lawsuits out in the country that are moving fairly quickly, raising religious questions about the new healthcare law. And guns, gosh, there's litigation around the country trying to fill out the meaning of what the court did in the District of Columbia gun law. So she made a pretty good case that let's take a look at this young court with new members and see what's going on. And that's why I decided to give it a shot. But I do make the point that it's early. And Linda and I have talked a little bit about what that means in terms of John Roberts himself.
Right. So just to backtrack a bit, so these 4 cases, the DC against Heller, the gun case, parents involved, the integration case, Citizens United, of course, needs no further introduction, and the healthcare cases, you said they all come to the court brought by or supported by quite